I just will introduce through this session and later on maybe guide you through this session. My name is Wolfgang Bokelmann. I'm an agricultural economist, but later on you will see it's a rather interdisciplinary approach here. The topic is value chain development for underutilized horticultural crops as strategic means to generating local food and nutrition security. Just to say, we are running a project in Kenya about this topic, but what we would like to do to bring this topic into a broader perspective, and therefore we invited also some other guests for this session to present. And we are very keen to have a discussion with you and maybe also some feedback about this topic. Maybe just to start a little bit with a motivation to do or to talk about this topic in a way. Food and nutrition security is still on the top agenda of the topics we are thinking about, and especially if you are looking to the number of people which are lacking essential micronutrients and vitamins. I think the problem is still a very large one, and especially poor people are affected by those lacking of nutritious food. Maybe one dynamic aspect which also increases this problem is climate change, which leads to a situation that food security and nutrition security especially is in danger in a way. And if you're looking to the literature in general, we could say the current research efforts have identified underutilized crops in general as a large potential to improve the situation in a way, especially for resource-poor households in a way. So if we are looking very much in short what to do, these potential, in this case AIVs, but we could say in general underutilized crops, they can contribute to alleviate the double malnutrition burden, or it said provide essential micronutrients and reduce obesity. Also, they have high antioxidant content, so they scavenge for radicals in the body, and here contribute to reduce incidence of diet-related diseases. But moreover, I think it's an opportunity for underprivileged and resource-poor, and finally also an engine for economic growth because it offers some opportunity sets for income generation in those farms. So there's one topic why we said it's worth to deal with these underutilized crops. The second one is, or the second part of this session today is to bring the view also to this value chain aspect. So it started in a way with a statement that just looking on production would be a too narrow view in order to use these opportunities we are talking about. So especially there are links among the farm produce to the consumers, and we have to look for it, what's happening in this respect. Especially if you are looking to the growing urbanization, we have these problems that we have a growing division of labor, we have this value chain, and then it would be necessary also to look to it. So this is the reason why we had in mind to say if we would like to address these food and nutrition security, then we have to look to it in a broader value chain perspective, and that was the reason why we did it here. If you're looking, I will just go very much through because later on our presenters will go a little bit more in detail what are the impediments or what are the difficulties in the system. Partly those crops are often seen as poor man's food and they are not accepted very much. We have also missing research in this field. We have in some case inadequate seed supply and also technical information, and lack of appropriate resides on it, and maybe post-harvest you would see problems are major problems, and partly also the policy framework could be improved for this type of research. So what we would like to do with you together, and we are very keen also to get your inputs and feedback to this, is to discuss a potential comparative advantage or the benefits resulting from the focus on neglected horticultural crops, and reveal, so here it would be more the focus on what is the benefit and what could be maybe counter-arguments about these type of strategy. And the second is to reveal effective, efficient and inclusive way to further develop value chains. I think this is very much important to see in which way we can address especially the needs of resource-poor people in this respect. And finally, if it's possible in the discussion, to critically address the viability, strengths and weaknesses of value chain development we will discuss today. Just to say some words about the plan we have in it. The first question, and this is something which takes place before the break, it's more doing the right thing. So we will discuss a little bit the benefits, but also the limitations of such approach. And we invited nutritional scientist Michael Krawinkel, who will give an introduction to this topic from the perspective of dietary science. Then we welcome here very much Mitcham from Davis, who is working on post-harvest technology, and especially thankful we are working to Willis-Kosura from Nairobi University. He will look to this problem from a more socio-economic perspective in a way. And finally, also Silke Stöber, who is working in our project Rotting Layer, which she will also give a special focus on climate change impacts and what is the influence on value chain strategies. After that, hopefully, if everyone is in time, we will have a discussion of about 20 minutes, and then there is organized a tea break outside for about 15 minutes. In the second session, doing things right, we are more looking for how to structure and how to the value chain and how to give some recommendation in this respect. And here we start with Susanne Huyskens-Keil, who will focus on the post-harvest side of these underutilized crops, and also on the use and consumption of those crops, and Elisha Gogo, who has a special view also on the topic of food losses and how the problem could be improved. Unfortunately, we have to say Mary Abukutsa was invited here. She didn't manage because of visa problems. We have some slides we added at the end, and they will be presented by Elisha later on, addressing some, in our perspective, important points about this value chain. And finally, we will have a discussion of about 20 minutes in order to get your feedback and maybe get some information, hints, what could be improved. Just very short, I would just inform if anyone has some concerns about it. We would try to record this debate in order to be able later on to reflect a little bit on this session, and we would also make some pictures, but more from perspective of the presenters here, and hopefully no one is here who has some concerns about it. If not, so I would like to start and invite Michael Krawinkel, who will give the first presentation.
Well, good morning from my side, and I'd like to start with thanks to the organizers of this session, to the organizers of the conference, and to you that you join this workshop and that I can be here to talk with you about these essential issues. I think from a nutrition perspective, it may be necessary to quickly introduce, I'm not going through this slide in a whole, this casual model of malnutrition. It essentially goes back to UNICEF about 25 years back. And the essential point is that food security is one pillar for fighting malnutrition, or insufficient food or food insecurity is one pillar in the causes of malnutrition, and this is mediated through inadequate food intake. What I'd like to point on is that there are other pillars like inadequate care. If you consider feeding young infants, feeding sick people, feeding very old people, you need a certain care infrastructure either in the families or in the community to support them. And we all need a certain state of health or freedom from disease in order to utilize the nutrients and the energy we can obtain from the diet. Nutrition has been also in the focus of the Sustainable Development Goals, and I copied here a slide from Sight and Life and modified it a little bit. All these brownish goals of the Sustainable Development Goals have nutrition as a vital precondition to achieving this goal, and the green ones are those who support nutrition. I'm not going into details, but you see there's quite a number of SDGs which are in a supportive role for nutrition, and the brownish ones for which nutrition is a vital prerequisite. Therefore, it's an underestimation if you only look at nutrition as a topic in the SDGs. It's zero hunger is the core topic for nutrition, but many other or all other SDGs are also interrelated to nutrition. One thing has not been addressed when this SDG debate was and when the SDGs were developed, that is dietary diversity. Nutritionists consider it the missing global target, and there are WHO targets for minimum acceptable diets for infants and young children beyond the period of exclusive breastfeeding, and there's especially promoted by FAO the Women's Dietary Diversity Score, which aims at getting women worldwide to consume more than 5 out of 10 food groups from these foods mentioned here. So this is an approach to improve diet quality, and I'm going to come back to the point that how essential this improving diet quality is beyond meeting the nutrient needs in the world. If we go one step from food security over nutrition to human consumption, we get another dimension into the debate, because the consumption depends first on food availability, but also on food accessibility and on food preferences, and especially food preferences are driven mainly by our knowledge, our attitudes, our awareness of nutrition, and there's also an emotional background, what we have been eating as a child, we remember later in life as something desirable. The next step to consider what makes consumption sustainable has to do with food availability. That means food production and making food accessible is secured in a sustainable way, and that the food preferences are consistent with number 1 and 2. I think that's important to really have in mind. People have certain food preferences which are not only driven by marketing strategies, but also by their traditions and many social and cultural and knowledge aspects. If we look at what the world eats, this is a FAO statistics from 2015, you see a major part of the human diet is cereals, and then we have some vegetable oils, some meat, sugars, sweeteners, and a comparatively small portion of fruits and vegetables and pulses, which we consider as essential sources of micronutrients, of vitamins, but also a source of bioactive plant compounds, which have regulatory effects on our health and on our diets. If we go further with this question, how can we get people to consume in a sustainable way? It needs them to make informed decisions, to know about it. I think there's a large cognitive aspect in this, that they can do informed decisions and get independent from advertisement. And the second aspect is a certain security, that they feel comfortable with the food they can access and they can get, and that they don't have to worry and to say we need to feed, or I need to feed my family by any means which I can approach, and I cannot select certain foods. And this includes also a hope for a future with sustained food security. I'd like very quickly to refer to some research we have done in collaboration with FAO and partners in Malawi during recent years. And our focus was on improving the infant and young child feeding in this period of complementary feeding. And nutrition education could be identified as one essential element of improving diets via the child dietary diversity, which increased. And when child dietary diversity increased, we could also see an effect on the height for age Z-score. That means the growth of the child. You may be aware that chronic malnutrition leads to stunting, to a retarded child growth, and therefore the height for age Z-score is an essential indicator for identifying long-term trends in malnutrition. And the aim nowadays in nutritional sciences is very much focused on reducing the number of children with stunted growth, the management of children with wasting, with acute malnutrition is rather a clinical challenge and would be a topic I'm not going into details today about it. This pathway A is nutrition education impacts on CDT, and pathway B is that the heart gets influenced by CDD. So this intermediate is necessary, the dietary diversity, in order to have a beneficial effect on the stunting. If you go further into what makes consumption sustainable, the question is to be addressed how far physical and social environments support sustainability. This means how the circumstances under which people live and the environments facilitate sustainable behavior, sustainable consumption. And the last point, that we can teach people, we can inform people, and we can get people to behave in a way that consumption becomes sustainable. And if we look again at FAO data, you see that milk and that meat and meat products have play quite a role in human diets. This here is a comparison from 1961 to 2011. Then we have also to face that this is associated with large emissions of greenhouse gases, especially cattle meat and pig meat and rice production contribute to climate change, and this is something which will be discussed later, I think, in this session as well, and in the whole conference, how we can shift human consumption into a direction which is less associated with negative climate change effects. If we consider diversity and sustainability, we know nowadays, and we can state that extensive use of fruits and vegetables is an available and accessible resource for dietary diversity in rural and peri-urban areas. I don't talk about the urban areas because there it's really a somehow different challenge to make fruit and vegetables available to people and accessible in a way that can cover their needs. And this consumption of fruit and vegetables is sustainable as long as they are produced, stored and processed with sustainable methods applied. Let me, in one example, illustrate what dietary diversity can mean. My colleagues from ICRAF, from the International Center for Research on Agroforestry and Nutrition, did a study, a comparative study of the nutrient contribution by different diets. And here you see a white rice-based diet which does not contribute to vitamin A, vitamin C, but a little bit to folate, iron and zinc. This is a 100% line of recommended dietary intake. If we consider the so-called golden rice or golden rice-based diet, we can increase pro-vitamin A intake, but we have no effect on the other micronutrients. And if we go back to the white rice and add carrots, we have a good opportunity with 50 grams a day already to cover the vitamin A and pro-vitamin A needs. We provide some vitamin C and some zinc. And if we don't have carrots, there are alternative vegetables which can contribute to the provision of the nutrients. And if we extend this to white rice, carrots and oranges, or some alternatives, guava, baobab pulp, moringa leaves or mango, we can further improve the micronutrient provision. If we add a little bit of meat, we can further improve the provision of micronutrients, and it can be replaced by sesame seeds and by other vegetables. And if we finally add some lentils and spinach, we can really cover the essential micronutrient needs and provide, and people can access the essential, some essential micronutrients just by diversifying the diet. And I think it's important to be reminded that even throughout the years with some seasonality, this is an approach which is sustainable and which can be achieved on local and regional level, and is not dependent on nutrient fortification or nutrient supplementation, with a small exception to iodine. If we look at the most recent Global Nutrition Report of 2016, we have 2 billion people lacking key micronutrients like iron and vitamin A worldwide. 155 million children are stunted, 52 million are wasted, 2 billion adults are overweight and or obese, 41 million children are overweight already, and 88% of the countries face a serious burden of either the 2 forms or the 3 forms of malnutrition. First, malnutrition is related to food insecurity. Second form is overweight and obesity. And third is disease-related malnutrition. If we consider not only the aspects of or the effects of HIV/AIDS and other diseases on the individual, but also on the communities, especially I think in Southern Africa, there's a lot of experience how food production goes down under the impact of HIV/AIDS. What can be done about these challenges? The lack of micronutrients is related to deficient diets, and we must try to improve dietary diversity. We must improve the amounts and frequency of feeds for many people in order to prevent and manage stunting. Wasting is mostly related to policy failure. I don't think there's an agricultural approach or a medical approach to manage waste. The wasted child can be managed, but the prevention of wasting is to avoid war and to avoid all these human-made conditions under which people suffer not only food insecurity but hunger And this is something we will not be able to solve with agricultural or nutritional means. The challenge of overweight and obesity is mostly due to fat, salty, and sugary diets. And I think there's a lot of information necessary or needed. There's the marketing restrictions in some part of the world. There are already marketing restrictions to prevent overweight and obesity, or by taxing products, putting a levy on sugary drinks, for instance, is the approach followed in Mexico and in some other parts of the world. This is a different challenge. Here we talk about food security in the conference, but this double challenge of having people food insecure on one side and on the other hand having people getting overweight and obese is pressing even in rural areas, even in remote areas. We did some study in my group in rural Tanzania with partners from Morogoro and identified up to 20% of women in some rural districts being overweight and obese. So we cannot only focus on overcoming undernutrition or food insecurity, but we need to consider at the same time improving diets and improving diet quality. And regarding this high number of 88% of the countries worldwide facing a serious burden of one of the forms of malnutrition, makes it necessary to inform politicians, inform administrators, inform societies about the challenges for human and for the society, and to develop cultural and economic approaches to improve diet quality. That's what I wanted to say in this introduction to the session, and therefore I thank you again for listening and for the invitation.
So thank you very much for this framing of our problem we are looking for, and maybe in the next step I would like to invite Prof. Mitcham from Davis, California University to give her presentation.
All right, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation to be part of this session with so many other great speakers. So thank you all for being here. So I am going to focus on the nutritional value that fruits and vegetables bring, and it'll be a nice kind of add-on to the previous talk. So we know that, I would imagine all of us in this audience accept the fact that fruits and vegetables have a lot to offer nutritionally. There are many different vitamins, minerals that are available from fruits and vegetables, and around the world we see a lot of programs to promote increased consumption. And as we'll see later in the talk, across the world we're not eating enough fruits and vegetables, so there's a lot of efforts to promote this. Fruits and vegetables are linked to more than half of the leading causes of disease. So high blood pressure, high body mass index, diabetes, also cholesterol is linked to diet. So fruits and vegetables have a lot of different things to offer. And in addition to what I've already mentioned in terms of vitamins and minerals, there are these phytonutrients, things like antioxidants and flavonoids, as an example, that we're really only just starting to understand the health benefits that they provide. So this table here kind of further explains some of the different important nutrients that fruits and vegetables have, and you'll see that the dark green leafy vegetables, the orange vegetables have the provitamin A, nuts have vitamin E, so lots of important nutrients. And I think the slide you showed where we started with rice and then we started adding on different produce items really illustrates the point that these foods can contribute to a very healthy diet. Now, vitamin C is a very important nutrient, and 90% of it comes from fruits and vegetables in our diet. It is a specific requirement for humans, important for cell repair and protecting against oxidative stress, but it is a labile vitamin, and it's one that can sometimes degrade in produce items after harvest if they're not handled properly. And then, of course, the antioxidant activity is receiving a lot of attention in recent years, very high in fruits and vegetables, in the components of, say, phenolics and the vitamins. And it's important to reduce oxidative stress in our bodies, particularly as we age, but also due to environmental pollution and other kinds of stresses. So many countries have dietary guidelines, but not every country. Actually, there are a number that haven't yet developed them. But when we look at developing guidelines or is talking about health benefits, there are two broad groups of approaches. There are studies where they look at the epidemiology, so they look at large populations and kind of correlative evidence. So there are associations, not causation, that's determined from these studies, but it can give us an idea about how different kinds of diets, for example, might influence our health. And then, of course, there are clinical trials where participants are assigned to controlled diets or interventions, and then we look at their specific health outcomes. And in that case, there tend to be more short-term. Obviously, we'd like them to be more long-term, but there you can actually more closely demonstrate cause and effect. So this is some data that is showing the effects. It's actually from a meta-analysis of prospective cohort studies where they were looking at how fruit and vegetable consumption related to the risk of cardiovascular disease. And so on the y-axis is relative risk, and as that decreases below 1, it's showing that the risk of cardiovascular disease is decreasing as the amount of fruit and vegetable consumption per day increases. And 400 grams per day is often a recommended amount. You can see that you do still get some benefits beyond that if you're able to consume more. So it does show a fairly good linkage from this study that was just published this year. So we talked about fruits and vegetables. It's a very big category. We talked about the different colors of fruits and vegetables and what they can contribute. There are some fruits and vegetables that seem to be sort of often called superfoods at times. That seem to offer a lot more than just the vitamins and minerals. And we're just, again, still understanding exactly what the contributions are. Bitter melon is one of those that I think populations around the world who consume bitter melon have known for a long time that these are really good for your health. So they have all sorts of effects, reducing diabetes, reducing anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, etc. Another crop you hear a lot about is moringa. It seems to just have so many benefits. It's hard to imagine one food having that many different benefits. But I would like to make the point that I really feel like all fruits and vegetables are multifunctional. You know, each one has several vitamins and minerals that are important for health. And while focusing on the more traditional diets has a lot of benefits socioeconomically, and sometimes some of those foods are like bitter melon and they're just way more nutritious. I think just trying to increase consumption of horticultural crops, and I think horticultural crops in general are underrepresented and underappreciated in terms of global nutrition. So I think they all need attention. We heard in the last presentation about the multiple burdens of malnutrition, that we can have stunting, you can have overweight or obesity, and anemia. These three issues can happen in the same populations and sometimes in the same individual. And so this is just showing a list of different countries that are affected by these particular issues, and oftentimes they're all happening at the same time in the same place. So fruit and vegetables are one of those few foods that can address both undernutrition and overweight and obesity at the same time by contributing to micronutrients and also dietary diversity. and reducing the risk of coronary heart disease, cancer, and overweight. It is important to know that almost 2 in 3 of the world's obese people live in low and middle income countries, so there is a strong linkage between income level and obesity and diet quality as well. This study was published last year that looked at, so it was a mixed effects model looking at the relationship between the availability of food groups and 2 measures of health outcomes. In this case, child stunting, and then the rate of heart disease. And this was actually a global study, so it looked at countries across the world from high income, very developed economies to developing economies. What I wanted to point out is that, when you look at stunting, there are different food groups that can have benefits in terms of reducing the percentage of stunting. But actually, vegetables and fruit were the only 2 groups that both had positive outcomes for stunting and also reducing the rate of heart disease, heart disease. So that particularly is, so meat can increase the rate of heart disease, but that tends to be more associated with more affluent and developed countries, not so much in developing economies. So in countries that have food-based dietary guidelines, all of them recommend increasing fruit and vegetable consumption, so that's good. But 74% of the world is not consuming an adequate amount of fruits and vegetables. And particularly in low and middle income countries, we find that the amount of fruit and vegetables being produced is not in agreement with what is recommended for consumption. So there's not enough production. So lots of room for improvement. This data here is showing the consumption of fruits and vegetables compared to the recommended 400 grams per day in different regions of the world. And only East Asia meets the bar, and no other part of the world meets the minimum recommendation. However, so the blue bars are 2000 and the orange bars are 2000. Sorry, the blue bars are 1990, the orange bars are 2013. It is improving, okay? In every region you do see, except the US and Canada, unfortunately. Every other region, there's an increase in consumption of fruits and vegetables. Unfortunately, though, we are working against some other trends in diets, and that is that there is a trend toward increased consumption of processed and highly processed foods. So it may be hard to see some of this, but we're looking at low middle income, upper middle income, and high income regions. And these lines represent increases in consumption. The red line is processed foods, and the blue line is ultra-processed foods. So you see that there are increases, particularly in the low and upper middle income areas. In the high income areas, we're seeing that tail off, but you can see how much higher it is already, but there aren't any further increases happening. So there's a lot of competition with less nutritious foods in many cases for people's stomachs, and so that's what we're having to fight against. And unfortunately, this issue is a bigger issue in the developing world. Well, it's a bigger issue in urban areas, I should say, as compared to rural areas. So here we're looking at where do you spend your money on food? And in rural areas, still mostly food you produced yourself, although as you get more and more income, that decreases, and the amount of processed foods you eat starts to increase, even in the rural areas. In the urban areas, we definitely see a big trend towards purchasing highly processed foods, which are particularly less nutritious in most cases. So this is one of the big challenges that we have. Okay, so I wanted to mention a couple of case studies. This first one is a project that was Anna Herforth, who was then getting her PhD at Cornell University, worked on a project in Kenya and Tanzania looking at traditional foods. And first of all, they looked at the availability of food groups in Kenya and Tanzania, and they found that the top line is starchy roots and cereals, And then here we have legumes and nuts, so not enough availability compared to what is needed. And then for fruits and vegetables, again, we're way below what is needed or recommended. So their study was pretty comprehensive. They included training people how to grow traditional food, education about their nutritional value, trying to build the image of these foods among the farmers, and then also consumers more broadly. And then so they did a lot of training, a lot of improvement of production practices. And these are some of the crops that they were focusing on. So it's a lot of the indigenous vegetables that are found in Africa. And so basically what their study showed was that the participants in the project consumed more traditional vegetables. And the main factors that were associated with increased consumption were an increase in production, so more product being produced, better, more positive attitudes about consuming those products, increase in knowledge about the health-promoting properties of these foods, particularly some of the medicinal uses, and then just growing a greater diversity of products. So another project I want to mention is one that the Horticulture Innovation Lab is funding. And I guess I didn't mention at the beginning, I serve as the director of that program at UC Davis, and it's we fund a range of projects around the world. And this particular project is our flagship nutrition project for this 5-year phase of our program. And it's led by Jim Simon at Rutgers University, and he's also working with Steve Weller at Purdue, and then a number of collaborators in Kenya and Tanzania and Zambia. So it's similar to the previous project that Anna Hurstforth had, where we're trying to look at how we can have a nutritional impact on individuals by promoting African indigenous vegetables. So again, with a similar project, they're looking at best management practices for production of these crops, increasing the capacity of the growers, promoting demand and understanding about the benefits of these foods. Also working to improve the germplasm, so testing some germplasm from the World Vegetable Center, but also doing some breeding and development of enhanced nutritional content in some of these, and also better production performance. And then there is a pre and post survey to evaluate the impact of the program on access to these foods, both at the household level and at the greater community level. And the ultimate goal is to increase access, availability, and affordability. So the other component of their study is that it's looking at not only interventions to increase production and whatnot, but also behavior change communication. And so they have a factorial study with and without behavior change communication to look and see what impact that has. And then finally, I just wanted to mention some preliminary findings from a study we're doing in collaboration with Tufts in Bangladesh, where we're looking at how nutrition and agricultural programming influences the household nutrition status of households in Bangladesh. And we just have some preliminary data from some of the surveys that they have done that relate to the topic of this meeting. And one is that they found that diversity in fruit and vegetable production is very strongly correlated to diversity in household consumption of fruits and vegetables. So high correlation there. And then they also found that households producing horticulture, it's more, if the household produces horticulture products, it's more likely that women would report that they eat 4 or more food groups, okay? And particularly if they produce a diversity of horticultural products, and that's more correlated. And then also fruit production was correlated to the amount of fruit that children consume, which was associated with fruit production diversity. So the bottom line is from those 3 studies that I highlighted is that they've shown that increasing production of horticultural crops increases consumption, and also behavior change communication about the benefits of horticultural crops increases consumption of horticultural crops. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Just to remind you a little bit, we plan to have a discussion after the, just before the break, so keep your question in mind, and we could discuss it a little bit later on. Now we would like to switch to another perspective to this issue of underutilized crops. And we are looking more from the farmer's perspective, because often a lot of small farmers are producing those products, and Huyskens-Kosura give us some ideas about the use of underutilized crops, especially indigenous vegetables.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to talk on is part of a bigger project which we did in collaboration with Humboldt-University, University, and Kenyatta University. So what I'm going to report is the specific study which is based in Kenya, and the title is Promotion of Underutilized African Indigenous Vegetables for Livelihoods and Nutrition Security. And as a background, over the past few decades, there's been a renewed interest in AIVs. And a number of research initiatives have been taken, including this one. And AIVs are known to have high levels of minerals, calcium, nutritional, and the ones which have been already indicated. I don't need to belabor the point. And despite the growing recognition, they have been classified as underutilized or orphaned in some ways. So this requires, this particular issue requires attention, because although they are very highly nutritious, they are orphaned. What is the reason for these vegetables being left behind, and yet they are very, very nutritious? This is what we set out to establish, doing specific studies in some area in Kenya. So, among the AIVs species produced and marketed in Kenya, we have amaranth, nightshade, spider plants, cowpea, and crotalaria. And the growing recognition of the health benefits drives this effort. Despite the need to have increased productivity, it is not keeping pace with demand, because the consumers demand more and more of these AIVs, but yet if the market doesn't respond accordingly. So the current study looked at how smallholders perceive their characteristics, and how we can influence production, marketing, and end utilization of these particular crops. So the study highlights critical interventions which are needed to promote these vegetables to help reduce the health problems associated with lack of the nutrients. Now, the study was carried out in some counties in the rural Kenya, characterized by high production of AIVs. And then, of course, because of the proximity to a large body of water, Lake Victoria, we thought that this is an area where, if promoted, the demand for these kinds of vegetables can be met sooner than later. And we talk about the mean annual rainfalls are conducive to the growth of these vegetables. The area basically is characterized by smallholder production. There is also, the county has developed some centers where the smallholders can come and undertake what requires collective action. So that those kinds of efforts are encouraging the smallholder farmers to produce so that at least they can get cash for the vegetables they are producing. And we did multi-stage sampling. We collected data, and then basically we had a focused group discussion as to the problems associated with producing these vegetables, whether they market related or weather related and all that. So we got data to understand the problems facing the smallholder farmers producing these AIVs. Now, the results were as follows. The production of these AIVs is a primary activity to more than 2/3 of the farmers, who are mainly women. And land size owned is less than 2 hectares, with about 19% of total land owned allocated to the traditional, sometimes we call them traditional vegetables. And production is reliant on conventional agronomic practices, traditional tools, and farmyard manure. So there is no purchased kind of fertilizer for these crops. They rely on organic fertilizer. Production is also mainly rain-fed, and there's no irrigation. Access to extension services, credit and market information is very limited. The output is below potential. For example, only 654 kilograms per hectare a season, and this is distributed in traditional market outlets. The value addition activities are very limited, and the human capacity to carry them out is also limited, and this has led to major losses of produce, even if they are producing plenty. So a high percentage of them get lost because of post-harvest losses. Now, so the socioeconomic characteristics of the farm households which were producing this are indicated here. As I said earlier, gender, respondents dominates. Average age, over 40. Average years of schooling, hardly 8 years. Household size, about 6. Farming experience, about 8 years. Average monthly income, very low. About 7,000. This is the Kenyan shilling. Primary activity is farming. 71% of the households are doing farming. So the production of these traditional vegetables is just a small part of the activity. And average land size is less than 2 hectares, as already indicated. More is land under the traditional vegetables, is about 20%, output per kilogram, and all those kind of statistics indicate that the AIVs are not really the main activity in households, and yet they are so important in improving the nutritional standards of the households. So, and as I said earlier on, the extension services is very weak. I mean, there are no push to give these farmers the knowledge required to boost the production of these vegetables. Now, some of the institutional characteristics also show that the low push, I mean, there's no drive to increase the production or the availability of these vegetables, and that requires a lot of effort on the part of the extension officers, and also those who are concerned with a disease burden in the rural areas, so to speak. So this is just to show that the marketing aspect of what the traditional vegetables undertake. You can see that most of the products marketed at the farm gate. It doesn't move at the farm gate or open air market. This implies that the marketing aspect is still very low. So if those people come to the farm gate to access the vegetables, or at best the open air market in the neighborhood. So of course that infers that we should have a lot of activities with respect to value addition, so that they can find their way outside the rural areas, so to speak. And then, of course, conclusion, and what we can recommend is that there's potential to generate income from these vegetables and increase utilization of the very vegetables, but there are so many things which are constraining the smallholder farmers in producing this in order to benefit from the increased demand, but that's not happening. Production of the vegetables at a larger scale requires improved access to extension services, strengthening of farmers' groups to provide an important platform, because individually the small-scale farmers cannot do much, but collectively, of course, they can boost the production and even benefit from the value chain activities, which would then include better processing, better packaging, and therefore access to both the domestic and the external markets. And then that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Mick. I think this presentation makes a little bit aware about the perspective, the farmer's perspective, and some hindrances which are coming from the production side. Now, the next presentation will also bring in another perspective, which is combined with the use of underutilized crops. It makes aware that we are living in a very dynamic society, and one thing which is changing very much is also the environment, also the influence on climate change, but also biodiversity plays a very important role, and Silke Stöber will pay some more attention to these factors if it comes to underutilized crops.
Thank you very much for this invitation, and I'm now the last speaker, so it will be only maximum 15 minutes, then the floor is open for our discussion. So I hope you're still awake. I learned it I work in a project in Kenya, and usually when we work there with farmers, we start dancing, clapping hands. And in Indonesia, it was even, I experienced also working in farmer field school, that the facilitator always said, "Farmers," and then the farmers had to answer, "Yes," so to wake us up. So I hope we don't exercise it now, but yeah, I hope you woke up by my little story now. So the outline of this presentation is just to give you some short ideas on the sustainable food systems framework, some facts on the climate change and how does it manifest in Kenya, and also the impact on the vegetables. Then from our project, I'm also working in this project on African indigenous vegetables, so some ideas, how can farmers sustainably intensify their production, what works and what does not work maybe, and some conclusion, and my main questions to you. Agriculture is not only a victim of climate change, it also contributes to climate change. So I think the question of how to sustainably intensify the production is quite important. And this, we can say, 4 components are very relevant looking at the value chains of an agriculture product, which is on the one hand the demand management due to the growing population and urbanization and the increased income people have. So it's sometimes very hard to say don't eat processed food, don't eat this food if you're still at a very low level, while very rich countries are already at a very high level. So you can't stop this somehow, and if you want to stop it, that needs to totally new thinking and framing, but demand management is an important thing. I will concentrate now today but on the sustainable intensification, which is more the production side, the farming side. what happens on the farms. Then we also have, I will say, just one little slide on market governance, because this is also important in this case. And one little thing, what we hear much later after the break, on how to reduce food loss and waste. How does it relate to diversity? Yes, everything, when you look at these components, you need the diversity on the plate. We heard this morning, it's very important. There's a relation to nutrition. We also need the diversity on the farm, agrobiodiversity, crop rotation practices, and so on. We have also the diversity in the market, because we have several actors and we have several products, and we also have different ways of negotiating and bargaining and so on. And the same also happens in the value chains. We have seen very nicely from Willis, there are some very short value chains, and some are longer, some are exported, some are short, but AIVs, our African indigenous vegetables, where also I look now, is mainly a very short value chain, which ends sometimes even on the farm, and is maybe, looking at climate change, a very, very positive thing, because we need short value chains in order not to have so much higher transport costs and emissions through transport ways. How does climate change manifest in Kenya? Like in all countries, there is of course a growing temperature, which the predictions is up to, in the worst case scenario, at least up to 4% to the end of this century. And also, according to our household survey, which we did now in a panel about for 3 years, that 88% of the AIV farmers experience climate change, and looking at the shocks they experience, 32% on average are weather related. Of course, the sensitivities, especially in agriculture in general, is high, but for vegetable in particular, because it depends so much on rain, and the rainfall pattern, I will show a few slides, is worrying. And the higher temperature reduced productivity, and also, as you know, maybe there are very rare research, but there is some research that the nutrient content of products is also changed due to higher temperatures. On the other hand, we have an adaptation gap, because adaptive capacity of AIV growers in Kenya are rather low. Quite interesting, from our PhD students, just 2 papers under review, that income diversification and financial management from the data we have, for example, access to insurance or credit, is almost non-existent, which is a little bit different to what we had heard now from Professor Willis from CIA, and also the access to high value informal markets is very limited, is neglected. Maybe up to maximum 5% of the farmers have access to high value markets. But it is on the other hand a very important asset to adopt sustainable intensification practices, which was analyzed by our PhD student in the sub-project. So the question is how, under these circumstances, we can sustainably intensify. One important thing is the water. It is a really constraining factor, and Kenya has several agroclimatic zones, and here are farmer perceptions, and you can see in the humid zones, Kakamega and Kisii, farmers perceive more rain and longer rainy seasons mainly, but a few also perceive more unpredictable and extreme rainfall. These are the red dots, and almost nobody experienced no change in rainfall, which are the white dots. These are our farms where we did our panel survey. And this is manifest totally different in Nakuru, is a sub-humid zone, and in Kajiado, where we basically where the farmers do not experience more rain or longer rainy season. Looking at more detail in the historical rainfall trends from the weather data, which we get from Kenya Meteorological Office, we can see a statistically significant association of a linear trend only in 2 counties, which is in sub-humid Nakuru and in the humid Kisii. But you see all the trends, the lower are quite strong. I don't know, they have a pointer too? No, anyway, it is the red ones, the positive trend is very high in the humid Kisi of even 9.1 and significant. And only in the semi-arid areas like Kajiado, it's a negative rainfall trend of -2, but it's not significant because the variability is very high. For farmers, what does it mean? Some, so for example, you have days in Kakamega where the dry spell is just increasing. You have an increasing trend of days where there is no rain at all, even if it's humid. And that is very negative, of course, for vegetable production, even there is not so much irrigation. And on the other hand, you have also the increasing days with heavy rainfalls of more than 50 millimeter. Here, example from Kakamega, where the trend is very, very strong. So what to do then? How can you sustainably intensify? Yes, water is definitely something you need to take care of, but improved irrigation is not spread among indigenous vegetable farmers. Only 12% of the household 30 farmers irrigate with some a little bit advanced methods like hosepipe sprinklers or with small motor pumps. And the rest is watering by watering can and is sometimes very cumbersome work, and sometimes they just forget because the water access is too far. There's one good thing what farmers really, I think, are practicing in their garden is a quite pronounced crop rotation, so with very wide crop rotations, many crops included, and you can see even here the green crops mentioned, they are the real survivor crops among the ARVs. Maybe we can discuss this later, and they are also included not only for food, because maybe they are not really the preferred food, but they are very good to also have healthy soils, and healthy soils also provide maybe healthy food. And that is something what farmers really can do, and I think there's good performance. On the other hand, and that's why you can also see the AIV diversification is quite high on the farm. They grow, according to our survey, maximum 6 different AIVs in 2016. And of course, the diversity is higher in rural compared to peri-urban areas. What I liked from our data, and I was very surprised that commercialization as such does not mean a loss of biodiversity, because the farmers who commercialize their AIVs have also a quite high agrobiodiversity. They commercialize more than one AIV, and even as subsets, so you can see that does not say that they start becoming monocultural AIVs by commercialization. And this is even a significant fact. We come now to a very hard thing. I mean, that is a little bit harder stuff, but how to in the future sustainably intensify, because you know the soils in Kenya or in many African countries really lack nutrient. They are somehow, not only people are hungry, the soils are also hungry. And soil fertility management strategies this is a hotspot for the climate change, because the N2O emissions are the main source of greenhouse gases. And according to the research of the PhD student Kungat, who did with chamber measured the greenhouse gases, finding out that of course, if you just look at the nitrous oxide intensity, which is the emissions per kilogram of fruit or of vegetable output, then you would say the manure or the mixed variant of combining chemical nitrogen fertilizer with manure has the lowest intensity, N2O emission intensity. But why do farmers sometimes they use manure? Most of them use manure, we heard it, but if you want to increase the yields, you maybe also need to put some synthetic fertilizer on top of it. And it makes also sense, because in terms of, when you look, this is all about metrics, when you look at these emission intensities per US dollar earned by these vegetables for the gross margin, you end up in having the best variant, 0.6, which is a mixed variant. So it's even better than the manure variant. And you see in the control field, where you don't use any fertilizer, you have a very, very high nitrous oxide emission economic intensity because you don't have any yields. We heard it before, we have 600 kg per hectare sometimes, it's nothing, and we had even lower yields in the control field. Okay, but that is something to really think about, how to keep, also increase the yields. Other components, very short, it's not enough to sustainably intensify, but you also need better contract farming, so market governance is an issue. We have not many farmers with traders, and also the food loss and waste is a little bit, can be high on the production side, but can be even higher also in the supermarket size, where they just are thrown away at the because it's not sold, but that depends. I think we hear more on it. You're looking to the time, so I will skip that. So just want to, for my presentation, adapting to climate change is highly context and location specific. There are no blueprints because even the local rainfall patterns are so different. And I think solutions to develop with smallholder is the first step against their exclusion and discriminations. Also, when you're looking at the value chain development, because and I wonder very often, and that is my question, why so little is done to promote the sustainable food systems, and also how to promote it. We hopefully discuss it after the break. Farming practices, payment for ecosystem services is almost non-existent, but it's necessary to optimize the trade-offs. Social development, farmer movements, and farmer voice is also part of sustainable food systems, and to increase the adaptive capacity for long-term investments to participate in market and other services. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. So we left some time also for discussion, and I asked you to maybe think about your question. We could start immediately with debate. Now we have about 10 minutes up to break, maybe another 5 minutes more. Yeah. Do you have any question or comments?
Well, maybe a comment.
Would it be possible just to give your name and your
Yes,
affiliate?
absolutely. My name is Ingrid Fromm. I am a researcher at the Bern University of Applied Sciences in Switzerland. I work in value chain research, but mostly on commodities, coffee, cocoa, and to some degree pulses as well. This is a comment mostly based on observation. I originally come from Honduras, and I saw in one of the graphs that Honduras is a country where you have a high incidence of under 5 stunting in children, and at the same time you have an increased obesity rate. And I can witness that. I see it in every time I travel there, and I see how people are getting bigger and bigger. And one interesting observation that I have made is how the diet, the local diet, has become less and less diversified. I sat a while ago with my parents, and I'm asking them, for instance, what they ate when they were children, because I have children as well, and I want to think about diet and what I can offer them from the nutritional perspective. And for instance, they are telling me that some things, they're non-existent in the market anymore. Chard, mustard leaf that they used to consume as children as part of a normal dinner, spinach, yuca flour was also another common thing that they would eat together with the corn tortilla. And nowadays the diet is based on wheat tortillas and beans, and a lot of that relies on imports from other countries because Honduras does not produce wheat. These are products, for instance, chard and spinach. There is a potential to grow that locally. We have the climate, we have the conditions, and it needs to be grown. However, there's little market demand. These products, if you go to a supermarket nowadays, you do not find them. So my question or my comment is, how do we reconcile all these socioeconomic shifts? A lot of this has to do with urbanization. A lot of this has to do with people increasing their income. Honduras has moved from being a low-income country to more or less low-middle-income country. And then people start consuming more meat, and their diet also becomes less and less diversified. So I think at the core of promoting which are really at the base of the problem. So I don't know if you want to respond to that or not. It's just one comment that I
I don't know. Bess, would you like to say something about it?
Well, I think that's a really great comment, and I've seen that in a lot of places around the world. I think perhaps some of these programs that are really trying to address educational aspects, maybe bringing in past cultural foods, which they used to be popular. Sometimes that resonates more with people, so perhaps focusing in on some of those in the promotion and some of the local programming. But the challenge is, as from what I've seen, people have aspirations to improve their lives, and unfortunately, the examples they've followed are poor examples of related to diet, right? So to be more affluent, I know you want to have the ability to buy soda and processed foods, and that is seen as more affluent rather than eating nutritional foods. So I think there's certainly an educational component to it, but it's a very challenging thing. It's a problem, I think, really in so many places around the world, whether it's evolved in the economy or completely developed.
I think it is much more related to time, as time allocation is an issue, and then the consumers want very quick time because there are so many things. So time development, which is very difficult to consume traditional foods, and in any case, the traditional foods are not available where they can live. Most of them are not scenario are the farms. So it's so difficult to access them. But also, as I said, convenient foods are more demanded than these other foods.
Just, is it a comment to this? No, just to say this was the reason why we thought we need to have a type of value chain perspective which links the production side with the consumption side, and even on the consumption side it's very much a cultural issue, and if you're looking to Kenya, even in different regions you will find quite different situations in it, and it needs to have a look to those issues in a way that was also some motivation to organize a session in this way, to have these two perspectives. Okay, you had a question, and then after that behind. Yeah, you can just come here if you want to as a microphone.
Kenyan, that's why I want to talk. I've been doing very little work with the LPs, but I'm looking more at, from the nutrition point of view. I'm a clinical nutrition practitioner.
Could you just give your name?
I'm Judith Kimiwe from Kenyatta University, Department of Foods and Nutrition. Now, what I was trying to ask, or rather bring to the attention of the various presenters is that how much have you involved the structures at the grassroots level? The Ministry of Agriculture, the extension officers, and the farming cooperatives and things, people who are already involved in trying to do agriculture in one way or another. They may not be working with ARVs, because we are looking at sustainability, we are looking at people who can help do the buying in so that they can spread our information and probably put ARVs as part of whatever it is that they're doing. Because I found that is one of the weak links. That somebody talked about a gap, and I think that is a gap that we have not addressed very well, the extension extension services at the grassroots and the other structures, the cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives, women groups, and so forth. They are enablers, in other words. We are looking at barriers most of the time, but rather we also took time and brought in the strength that they enable us, like the structures that are on the ground that we will bring into this.
Yeah. Maybe just, I don't know how from our group, just a small comment to it. You are very much right. There is a gap between existing knowledge on the one hand and how it's implemented on the other hand. And it has to do in a way with innovations, and then you need to look what are the relevant actors which could spread this information. We have partly included into our projects, but just to give some hint to some impediments for this. Often if you are getting a research project, they are talking about research. They are not mainly talking about impact on the field or something like that. Partly this is often in some projects a missing link, and you are right with it. We have a project also here which is looking for how to bring innovation to practice, but you are right with your comment. Now I had two here at the end, and then you will have the...
Good morning, I'm Prasad Ingrid. I'm from World Agroforestry sector. I work in the AOCC project, African Orphan Crops project as genomic scientist. I mean, the presentations were very good, but I found that when we talk about sustainable intensification of agricultural landscapes, we are missing a very important thing in that, and that's the trees. We are talking about horticulture, and we are in AIVs is what we are concentrating, but then if it's AIV, it has to be also AIFs, which are African indigenous trees. And they are going to be a very important part, not only because of, also for nutrition and also for the other benefits which offer as a landscape component. And if we start including those in these projections, I think we may get different data. For example, when we talk about the consumption patterns, we saw open-air markets, urban schools, and hospitals being the major one. But we start including the indigenous fruits. I mean, hotels are one of the major consumers for tree tomatoes, for example, which are the local indigenous fruits. It's the fresh juice they offer in many hotels in Kenya. Also for schools, if we see the inclusion of fruits as one of the offerings through the government schemes, it's also going to change the perspective. It's also going to add to the nutrition. It's going to create the new value chains. And for many trees, there are already some new value chains coming up. For example, for moringa, there's a moringa leaf powder which is getting available, the baobab powder. And in those value chains, there's a problem of standardization and certification. So you have moringa today and you have it after a month. You have a different things. So these are also parts and parcel of the value chain for African indigenous crops. And I think we need to address all of that.
Yeah. I think just to say, we agree very much with your comment in a way, and maybe in the second session after the break we will address a little bit more those aspects. Here we look to the benefits. Now in the second session we will have a stronger focus on what to improve and where sometimes new business model, as you said, which are available for it, and we should discuss it and should have in mind when we have this second session. Thank you very much for your comment.
Maybe I'd like to take up this first two comments and combine it a bit with your comment. Changing nutritional behavior, I think, is a long-term activity, and research projects like ours or like the Horticultural project are always in danger that they have a 3 or 5 years schedule to stick to. And if you introduce trees, I was joking in Malawi that part of the project was to introduce mango tree seedlings, but we had a 3 years or 4 years time perspective. So the effect of introducing mango seedlings would have to be checked after 10 or 15 years, but not after 2 or 3 years. And therefore, I think it's really important to involve the local extension services and advisory services, because they will be there after 10 and 15 years still when we have gone out with the research, or our colleagues in the country will continue the research during their perspective. But it's a general weakness of our research project that we have a time frame which is too narrow. this is very difficult to overcome with the present system.
She's always suffering.
Okay. Well, the second point I wanted very quickly to make is that we should not underestimate economic influences on these things. You see heavy investments into processing foods and into offering processed food, and when you look into dietary diversity nowadays, you find in many places that people add junk food or replace even traditional food by junk food because the marketing is coming in with 10 times the budget we have for nutrition education or information. And therefore there is a big challenge to make it attractive and to get these indigenous vegetables and underutilized vegetables to become more attractive and to create the consumer's demand for them so that people start to invest in this area and not only in highly processed convenience foods.
We have now a problem we are now a little bit over the time and we have a second part, but I would like to limit it to this question or comment and just have your question in mind maybe for the second part, yes?
I'll just take it. I'm Capetown. I work for the International Crop Research Institute for the Stability of Tropics and based out of India, but we work in Africa. My comment was that I think one critical factor which needs to be looked into is entrepreneurship development. That's very critical because whether you look at connecting to the processed food industry or even process the product, you need an enterprise which is sustainable and in which the farmer is having a stake. So that's what we are doing right now with millets in India, because again, traditional foods, they are there, but they're not in a form which is convenient and processed. So we are working with the farmers, we are working with self-help groups in the community to empower them with simple processing systems which are not very expensive, but which produce quality produce which can be taken up by the global market. So I think that's a critical element which needs to be incorporated. I came in late, but it's already there, but I thought I'd just...
No, thank you very much for this comment, and we'll take up this topic in the second part of our session. Maybe then we have time for a last short comment.
My question is very brief. From all the presentations that I've heard, I think there is one weakness when researchers come. I come from the University of Zambia. When researchers come, I would like to call it top-down approach. They come with their own ideas, and as soon as the funding goes, they move away. There's no sustainability. There's what we call indigenous knowledge systems, which I think should be the starting point. And the sad news is that this indigenous knowledge is quickly passing away. I think there must be a compromise.
Yeah. Okay, we will also talk about this topic if it comes, for instance, for food preparation, where there is where are some problems also with indigenous knowledge. You are totally right. We try as good as possible to involve also stakeholders in the system, but you are right. This is a very critical element, and we maybe have the time later on to discuss it then a little bit more in depth. I would ask you, we are now a little bit late, if we could manage, if you are still interested in this session, if you could manage to be here at 20 minutes past 10 o'clock for the second session, where we go a little bit more in depth, coming to some recommendation and what could be done in the way we would proceed this debate. So thank you very much for your attendance here, and we will see us later. Thank you.
Project of sub-project 4 and 5. And as Professor Bokelmann said already, we were working in the field of post-harvest, emphasizing on harvest issues, optimizing of post-harvest treatments, so we pick up the concerns of the smallholder farmers, but also picked up some concerns supermarket has. We focused on optimizing processing treatments, and finally, that is what I would like to focus today, is on consumer health concerns. That means optimizing processing and cooking procedures, and how do they have an impact on nutritional and health promoting properties. And so during my presentation today, I will give you an overview briefly on the consumer trends, on nutritional and health promoting components, so on specific components we were focusing during our entire project. and then on the traditional local preparation and processing methods being applied in smallholder farmers and consumer issues. And then I will show you our key results on comparing open market and supermarkets in respect to nutritional and health promoting properties. How do they differ? And what kind of impact has the local preparation methods like sun drying, cooking, fermentation processes on these nutritional and health promoting properties. And finally, we did some, in our project, did some human health perspective and by the impact on the bioavailability. I will show you also our results and give you then based on these results our outcome and our recommendation what needs to be done in the future. First of all, the consumption trends, the traditional consumption trends. In general, we have a high diversity of all kinds of African leafy vegetables. Here, where we worked on our Horticultural project, and they are mainly grown in the home gardens. And you should be aware of the fact that in comparison to East and West African countries, in Kenya, there are twofold higher consumption of African leafy vegetables. So this is already a good trend we found in other SPs, sub-projects of Horticultural. And it was also focused that, or the outline, that in rural areas you have twofold consumption of African leafy vegetables in comparison to rural areas. And the consumer preferences are mainly beside amaranth, which is widely distributed, but also here nightshade, spider plant, cowpea, Potallaria, and kale are being preferred as in smallhold areas. The nutritional health value. We found out, as already stated in literature, documented in literature, that of course in a lot of African leafy vegetables, protein contents are quite high, antioxidative, carotenoids, vitamin A, vitamin C, calcium, iodine, and also zinc have high proportions in these African leafy vegetables. Yeah? And also the medicinal uses are widespread known. However, recently, as already mentioned before, more and more knowledge is distributed that these African leafy vegetables contribute to health impacts. That means have an antioxidative, have an anti-cancerogenic, and also inflammatory properties. Yeah? So looking at the traditional local preparation and processing, because these were what we picked up to ask smallholder farmers, consumers, how do they prepare their traditional vegetables. And in general, either they are cooked separately or mixed leaf with the main staples. That is what we found out. And these blanching, boiling, steaming, and frying these African leafy vegetables for 10 to 15 minutes, that is what consumers do mainly. And here focusing mainly on boiling and frying. And recently, microwaving and roasting is what is being done. And when we go into the preparation, we also looked what do consumers do with, how do they prepare it. So sun drying is very frequently distributed, solar drying, blanching before drying, but also fermentation. However, fermentation is a quite new issue considering African leafy vegetables, because in general you have these starchy vegetable roots and tubers which are being fermented, and sorghum and etc., but less than African leafy vegetables. So the know-how of can you really do that, was also part of our project. So the influence of these local preservation techniques or methods on nutritional and health promoting components. So I will, as mentioned before, will show you some of our key results which we found. We compared how is the nutritional components in the open market versus the supermarkets. And what we found out that exemplarily here demonstrated for some mineral components which are very important for malnutrition, calcium, iodine, potassium, magnesium, but we also focused on zinc. We found out that the total mineral components are more pronounced in the open market, in versus the supermarket, where the products have a longer shelf life. And also when we're considering the so-called health-promoting properties, the antioxidative beta-carotene or flavonoids, which we studied, we also confirmed that those components were at a higher content in the open market, here in yellow demonstrated, in comparison to the supermarket. And of course, in the open market, always mainly women are looking and taking care of the food in comparison to the supermarket, where they just lay there in the shelves and nobody's really taking care of the supermarket. And that problem we also focused in our studies, but I don't have the time to show you all the results, but just to emphasize on that. So when we look at the preparation and processing, specifically in the cooking, we checked boiling the African leafy vegetables for 5 minutes, for 20 minutes, that is what is commonly being done, and also sun drying is a very common preparation method. And in comparison to the raw material, we checked that we see here that the iodine is maintained. So you don't have really a change between the raw material and the cooking or sun drying. But the slightly lower content, only slightly, you find in the calcium and potassium content. And even in the zinc, you have an increase by doing 5 minutes or 20 minutes. When we look at the sun drying in general, also our other studies showed that sun drying mainly has a tendency to decline or decrease these components. However, potassium, magnesium and zinc was here in our study slightly increased. And also when we look at the antioxidative components having a health-promoting property like carotenoids, chlorophyll and flavonoids, it was shown that boiling up to 20 minutes could maintain or even increase those antioxidative components in comparison to, as I told you, sun drying has more the tendency to decline those components. And then we looked into the fermentation. As I told you earlier, there is not much known about how to ferment African leafy vegetables. And we have a group who focused only on processing procedures, optimization, and they found out the traditional way of doing it is using lactic acid bacteria. And it was found out that even also with African leafy vegetables, you can easily apply it. However, it's more advantage also to use starter cultures in the presence of 3% sugars and 3% salt, which is easily being done also in households. Yeah? And with this fermentation, you have the possibility to reduce drastically the spoilage and also to reduce pathogenic microorganisms like Listeria and Salmonella, which has a really strong impact during this preparation. And when we go into the nutritional components, we even found that various vitamins, vitamin E, vitamin B, can be maintained under this processing procedure. So it has a big advantage. So within our group, we have also people working on the impact of these health-promoting properties which are in a broad manner in African leafy vegetables on human health, specifically anti-cancerogenic properties and the bioavailability. And it was demonstrated that in a broad way in different African leafy vegetables you find different profiles of secondary plant components. And there was one group specifically working on in vitro studies and the bioavailability. And they worked in vitro in liver cells to cancer protective potential of the raw material and also subjected them to different processing procedures to see what happens then with this potential. And exemplarily here it's demonstrated that the Keil has a great potential in general to protect against aflatoxin-induced DNA damage. You know, in Africa, throughout Africa, aflatoxin is a big issue, and so this was one of our key results, that it has the capacity to reduce it. And even the short-term cooking, even 5 minutes are already enough to have this strong activity and against the aflatoxin reduction. Yeah, and so finally the outcome is that you find diverse profiles in different African leafy vegetables, and that you have to keep in mind to give further recommendations. Yeah? And then definitely we found out that they have a high antioxidant and anti-cancerogenic potential, all of them which we studied. And again, the issue of aflatoxins can be met by using either raw or processed African leafy vegetables. Yeah? So you can recommend the consumption of some of those to reduce the aflatoxin-induced diseases. Yeah? And what is very important, what I saw before our break, was there were some issues. How could we do this knowledge transfer? It is very, very important to provide these kind of informations. How could, during traditional cooking preparation method, how is it possible to maintain the nutritional status, to maintain also the health promoting properties of those valuable African leafy vegetables. So, of course, training is one important issue, and also to provide specific recipes among people. So, providing essential information on what happens to those highly perishable goods during post-harvest, yeah, and how can you prevent losses, yeah, which Elisha will focus on more. And of course, cooking workshops, encouraging also the contribution of men might be an issue, and also convenience products. You know, in Europe we have a strongly demand on this convenience, ready-to-eat products. So why not also offering in supermarkets, where we have this big problem, to offer in supermarkets ready-to-eat products, yeah, already prepared. Or what is also a big issue in the US and also in Europe, the so-called superfood. Nobody really knows what it means, but it has a real high marketing issue. So processing the African leafy vegetable extracts or powder, or what was mentioned on moringa, no? This is widely distributed. Why not offering these kind of new African leafy vegetables in a mixture, in a kind of powder? This is, of course, the future, definitely. But for supermarkets, maybe one of the options. Yeah? Okay, so I would like to acknowledge the huge group which I'm mostly organizing from Kenya and the German partners, and I thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much also for this. Keep your questions in mind. We will have a debate, discussion afterwards. Now I'm happy to introduce Elisha Gogo to you. He is one of the PhDs in the project, and that remind a little bit that capacity building is a quite important part in the whole project. So Elisha will present results of his thesis, and as I said at the beginning, unfortunately, Mayor Abukutsa is not here, and he will at least present some of the slides in order to address some topics which we think are also important to mention.
So thank you very much, and welcome to the presentation. I'm looking at the analysis of post-harvest losses of African indigenous leafy vegetables, and some of the approaches that can be used to reduce these losses. And I'll mainly look at the nutritional and the economic aspects. So just to give you a brief introduction is that African indigenous leafy vegetables are really perishable, they're highly perishable, and this means that there is a lot of loss of nutrients, and also the loss of the economic aspect, the money issue. And the issue is that there is lack of information concerning the magnitude of the losses. and some of the causes of these losses. And therefore, this makes the ways to try to manage these losses tall order, especially to the small, to the stakeholders. So another issue is that there are inadequate or rather inappropriate post-harvest management strategies which have been used, especially in Africa, specifically Kenya. And it means therefore that these post-harvest losses greatly contribute to food insecurity, aspects of malnutrition, especially issues of hidden hunger, the aspects of poverty and slow economic growth of the country, and also the issue of climate change, the aspects of environmental problems, issues to do with the gas emission. So we did some of the survey work, and the survey was majorly done whereby we are looking at, we are asking farmers some questions, and also separately we did some kind of a direct survey whereby we are trying to, take samples across the value chain, and we also do some of the analysis, nutritional analysis of the loss of these vegetables. And to begin with the quantitative losses, what you observe is that along the supply chain, beginning with the harvest, then during the transportation and at the market, you could see that we lost a lot of vegetables or AIVs are being lost. For example, at harvest, you could lose up to 18%. Then during transportation, the loss could go until 34%. And by the time it reaches the market, the loss is up to around 50%. So this means that nearly half of the produce that you have harvested is already going to waste. And here, it's important also to look at the economic aspects. And unless you break down the losses in terms of money, this is the way the farmer then can understand really the impact of the losses. And what we did is that we are trying to change these losses in terms of per hectare basis, and therefore we looked at how much amount of money is being lost in terms of per hectare. And this was done in all the main counties where the IVs were being produced, that is Nakuru, Kisii, and Kakamega. And you could see, and it's important to know that the losses actually, the amount of money which was being lost was really huge along the supply chain. Farmers could lose until about 5,000 euros. That one, if you convert Kenya shillings to euros, and this is a lot of money per hectare. This is money that can really be of much help to the farmers if we can try to manage the losses. So what are some of the causes of these losses? Based on the studies, beginning with the harvest, the main causes of the losses were mainly due to insect pests and diseases. Unfavorable weather conditions was also a big issue, and aspects of inappropriate harvesting methods, and sometimes also harvesting time. People do not know at what time do they harvest and at what stage do they need to harvest this vegetable. And really this has an impact on the post-harvest losses, and also the lack of appropriate varieties. Farmers were using the seeds from previous harvest, and if you use seeds from previous harvest, this has an impact on the yield and also quality of the vegetables. Moving on to transportation, some of the issues that we found is that the roads were not in good condition, and this also has an impact on damage, issues to do with the impact, damage, compaction, and other issues. And also, unfavorable weather conditions was also an issue because weather condition also affects the roads, and therefore this could also lead to post-harvest losses. And another issue is aspects of inappropriate handling, poor handling, where farmers sometimes they don't know the right way to harvest. The right way to handle the vegetables. Sometimes they just pack them anyhow, and therefore you encounter a lot of breakages, which really has an impact on the losses. And also the aspect of insect pests and diseases. During the transportation, some of these insect pests and diseases are harvested together with the vegetables, and therefore these effects are manifested during the distribution along the supply chain. Another issue was in the market, whereby there is an imbalanced supply and demand, whereby there are cases where there is a lot of glut in the market, especially during the rainy season, and there are cases where there is scarcity. This is during the drought. Like already was said in one of the previous presenters, is that most of these farmers, they rely on rainfall conditions in order to produce these vegetables. Therefore, this is a serious challenge. And another issue is a lack of cold storage facilities. Farmers could not, or the value chain actors cannot afford the refrigerators, and therefore this is an issue. And also another issue is inappropriate packaging. People are using, or farmers are using different types of packaging. There is no standardization on the packaging that could be used during the distribution of the AIVs. And another one is the unhygienic market conditions. This also has an issue on the aspect of the losses, and also poor handling. Sometimes you could find that they're just left in the open, and therefore farmers use their bare hands, or consumers, or rather the buyers use their bare hands, and therefore this also has an impact on contamination, on food safety. So it's also important to look at the aspects of the visual appearance, because buyers really, when they go to the market, they want to see how does this vegetable, how fresh is it, how green is it, for them to be able to buy it, or for them to be convinced in order to buy them. And one of the key visual appearance aspects that strongly came out was the aspect of the yellowing and also the aspect of wilting. And therefore, we asked them on what is the main problem, or rather how much does the aspect of wilting or yellowing contribute to this. And the farmers say that almost 10 to 50% of these vegetables were actually wilted by the time they were actually wilted, or yellow by the time they reached the market. So this is a serious issue, and you could see this was a major problem along the supply chain and in all the counties that we studied. So looking at also nutritional losses, it's important first of all to note that we have a major challenge in Africa, specifically in Kenya, because of the issues to do with malnutrition. And malnutrition, for example, aspect of hidden hunger, whereby most of the community lack important elements like iron and zinc. And it's also important to look at this, and therefore we study this aspect along the supply chain. And what we noticed that these mineral elements were hugely lost during the distribution. For instance, iron content could be lost until 10%, which is really too much. And you know how much iron can contribute to the children and also to women. Another thing is that the zinc content could be lost at least 11%, which is also a huge loss. And therefore, it is important to look for strategies or ways to manage these losses. Okay, another aspect that we looked at is the carotenoids, and we all understand the role of carotenoids in terms of their antioxidative potential. They are able to help the system in terms of the management of diseases. And this is really was a huge loss, because you could see that, for example, the losses were across were along the supply chain and also in all the counties. And for example, you could see the loss in Kakamega was really huge. And really the loss could be observed until 92% of these carotenoids was lost along the supply chain. And this was mainly contributed to the fact that farmers were using inappropriate packaging. They were using the gunny bags. Gunny bags are some kind of bags. Sometimes they pack it until this point. It could even be taller than me. And the vegetables are really squeezed. They're really compacted. And during this process, there's a lot of heat development. And carotenoids, as we know, is prone to oxidative enzymatic oxidation or non-enzymatic oxidation. And this could be the contributing factor why there was really that significant also the carotenoids. So, when we looked at those problems, it is now important that we see, okay, these problems are there, how then we really solve some of these problems. And this is where now this slide is coming in, some of the approaches that can be used to reduce the losses. And just to give you, we did quite a lot of this, but these are just some examples on how we can reduce the economic and nutritional losses of the AIVs. And this study, we're looking at different aspects of packaging, and this is an extended packaging bag, and this is also a Ziploc packaging bag. These are different types of packaging materials, which actually sometimes, like for example, the Ziploc bag, which is already being used by farmers or by the actors. And we also have some of the emerging technologies like use of UVC treatment in order to improve or preserve some of these qualities of these vegetables. So, looking at some of the key results in this area, for example, packaging. One of the most important things is that the packaging helped reduce the fresh weight loss by up to 73% or up to 61%, depending on the storage condition. And another issue is that structural carbohydrates, that is the ones that are contributing to the dietary fiber, the proteins, chlorophyll, carotenoids, and most importantly, vitamin C and E were really significantly preserved during when the AIVs were packaged in both storage conditions, that is 20 degrees and 7 degrees Celsius. And what is also important is that the packaging also helped to reduce the microbial status, especially the enterobacteria, and this was so at 20 degrees Celsius. But at 7 degrees Celsius, there was no appreciable advantage by use of packaging in terms of the microbial status. Okay, looking at the UVC treatment, one of the emerging technologies that I've already talked about, we did a study whereby we were valuing UVC between 1.7 to 3.4 kilojoules per meter squared, and this was able to preserve the mineral elements like, for example, magnesium and zinc. And this was predominantly at 5 degrees Celsius. And also looking at the other antioxidative health promoting compounds, for example, vitamin E, and also carotenoids, flavonoids were also preserved or increased by UVC treatment. And the most important thing is that the UVC was also effectively able to manage the microbial growth, especially until 2 days of storage. So basically, these are some of the results that I've talked about, and like I said, we did a huge experiment, and these are just some of the examples of the studies, some of the results that we found. And now I want to talk about the approaches to improve the use of indigenous vegetables in Kenya. This, like it has already been said, this was supposed to be done by Professor Abukutsa, and sometimes I feel that it's a huge, really shoes for me to fit into, because Professor Abukutsa has been a guru in this area. She has done a lot. Actually, she started working on AIVs even before I was born, so she has a huge experience in this area. But I'll try myself and try to fit into the shoe and see how far I can go. Okay? So, she has really done a lot in terms of the advocacy and promotion of the AIVs. And just some of the works that she has done include aspects of the oral media, whereby she has engaged people in their poems, songs, and dances, where the AIVs are trying to brought in some kinds of themes in those songs, in those poems, so that the awareness of these AIVs can be brought back, so that people can understand their importance and how they can be helped, they can be utilized in terms of human nutrition. Another thing is the exhibition and open days. And these exhibitions, normally what she does is that they will be called, various people or various stakeholders will be called on some of she exhibit some of the things she has done in AIVs. And open days, I think I was saying some of the open days where she will call people, researchers to come and see also some of the studies she's doing. And another important thing is the demonstration plots. Demonstration plots, sometimes if you go to the university, you find there are certain areas where crops have been grown, and farmers will be called to come and see really how the improved technology that they can use in terms of the production of the AIVs. Okay. So, just looking at the advocacy still, there was also issue of the print media, whereby she can also liaise with the government to try to, to produce some of the pamphlets which can be used also to, in schools also, and also by farmers, and see ways of producing these AIVs. And another one is the radio and TV. Various programs, there are so many programs that she has already been involved in terms of the promotion of the AIVs. And internet is also a powerful tool, and also the issue of the policy making, whereby she can influence the policy makers on how to produce on maybe the importance of the AIVs. Okay. Another issue is the AIV seed supply systems, and this one I think she has really done a lot because she has done a lot of work in terms of the promotion of the seeds, improving of the seed systems in Kenya, and she has produced several varieties. She has tried to produce several varieties in Jomo Kenyatta University, and some of these are actually already in the market. Farmers are using them. And just to give you the list of some of them, you can see all the names Abuku. So she has really done a lot. And these seeds, they're actually available and farmers are using them. And so far, I think they are really doing well. The aspects of capacity building initiatives is also very, very important. Like, for example, aspects of the curricular development. She has been involved in a lot of curricular development, especially in schools, where children are taught at the early stage the importance of the AIVs, why they need to consume them, and this is really paying a lot, and I think we are getting a lot of advantage in terms of this. And another thing is she's also involved in the undergraduate and postgraduate projects, quite a lot of them, and also she has done some bit of training in most of these areas of AIVs. And like, for example, in 2001 until 2016, I think she was doing a lot of training. She got some funds to train farmers on various aspects of AIVs and the ways to improve the yield and quality. And also the aspects of working there is also very important because she's involved in Horticultural, and there are so many PhD students and master students who are really focusing on these AIVs and in ways to improve their production and their consumption. Okay, another aspect that really can lead to the improvement of yield and quality is this was, for example, the aspect of ex situ and in situ conservation, whereby these AIVs really can be either preserved at their natural habitat or somewhere else. And this is important really for diversification. And some of the things that she has done, for example, at Marcelo University, I think I've been there once, and she has really done a lot of work, a great job there, because there's a huge botanic garden, and in this botanic garden there are various types of, AIVs, various species of AIVs which are grown there, and I think this is really important. And another one also, she has set up the seed support system, and this one I've talked about it. She has a lot of varieties which she has released, and farmers are already utilizing them. Another issue is the aspects of the publications and the disseminations. I think there are a lot of publications in terms of production and consumption of AIVs, and this is important also for dissemination, like for example the scientific papers, the leaflets, the DVDs, the documentaries. Most of these things are online, and they're also very important to improve or to promote the various aspects of production and consumption of AIVs. I think this is also an area that she also did a lot, and I want to comment on this because I think in a way she also influenced me in terms of going into this direction of AIVs. And one of the key things that is really important is mentorship. She has done a lot of mentorship to bring the young students in the production of the consumption of these vegetables, and now it's becoming a serious business. Many youth are really involved in the AIV production, and this is really encouraging. She has also been involved in terms of the recipe and product development. A lot has been done, for example, in aspects of value addition, and these are just some of the things that she has already done. Like, for example, if you see this one, these are some of the seeds and cake that you can combine, maybe some kind of recipe. And here you can see that people are enjoying some of the AIVs meats. And here, I think it's one of the AIVs combined with the seeds of the AIVs. I think that should be amaranth, and it's combined with sesame. You know sesame? Yeah, sesame. Sesame is combined, and I think I've tried this, and it's really nice. It's really nice. And these are some of the ways that I think it's also very important, because then it brings also the young into consumption of this. Because one of the things that I noticed, the greatest problem in AIV consumption is that the youth really do not want to consume this. And one of the key issues is that they're saying it is too bitter. They're complaining that it's too bitter with the cookies, nobody wants to eat. It's only you, maybe, and the wife that can eat it for an husband. So if we try to do this and promote this, then even these .coms, the so-called .coms, can come into the consumption of AIVs, and I think this is really important. And sometimes also, some chapatis, chapatis are also being prepared by use of AIV seeds. They are grounded and mixed with wheat flour, and you can prepare chapatis, and this is really important for value addition. Another aspect that I think is also important is that most of the farmers produce AIVs only for their own consumption, or for as a sustainable production, subsistence production system, whereby they produce it and only sell and eat it. And he has really tried to look for ways on how to improve the commercialization of AIVs, whereby this has been encouraged by, for example, the aspects of Vision 2030, which is one of the key anchors in the government, where they're trying to improve the production of the AIVs. And she has also been involved in the drafting of the strategic plan for the improvement of the AIVs. And also, she did a lot in terms of the rolling out, in terms of the commercialization of AIVs. So, these are some of the impacts or effects that she has obtained based on her great job that she has done. One is that at least now there's a bit of, though you can say that we are not at the end, the more still need to be done, but at least you're getting substantial yields in terms of these AIVs, thanks to the varieties that are already in the market, which she has released. And there are already some of the products which are being sold in terms of the value addition. Like I already told you, the sesame mixture of sesame and the AIV seeds. It's also some of the farmers are selling this and they're getting some money. And also the quality seeds, because of what she has done, we're already getting some quality seeds. Farmers are reaching out and getting some quality seeds, which means therefore they're able to get better yields and better quality AIVs. And also she has a lot of pamphlets which she has produced, and she has also trained quite a lot, including me in terms of the AIV production. So, like I said, I think it's a huge soup, but I think I'll fit somewhere. So, thank you very much for your attention.
Also, thank you very much that you're taking over this task to present some of the activities which are done in the value chain. Now we are coming to the discussion. We still have enough of time, and maybe some questions you couldn't ask in the first part would be possible to ask now. Yeah, I'm open for your questions. Or we are open, I should say. First, yeah. Could you just say your name and affiliation?
Yeah, my name is Ilisha from Olouch-Kosura. I just want to ask some questions from the first and the second presenters. The first one is with regard to the open market versus supermarket. With regard to the difference, you showed us that the mineral content was better in those vegetables that were kept in the open market compared to those kept in the supermarket. But the issue is, what about the contamination? Because if it is kept in the outside, in the open market means they are easily contaminated by any, including dust. And we know what kind of pathogen could be present in the dust, and so on. Have we considered this issue? That's one. And the other, the source of the supply. In the case of vegetables that are present in the supermarket, in my opinion, may have a reliable source. And but what about those vegetables that are easily available in the open market? Do we know where they are coming from? So here I'm talking about in African context. Okay? So this is the issue. And I would like also to say something about the moringa. And myself and my colleagues, we have done some research, especially on the leaf pad. As we know, we have two major types of moringa. the oleifera and the Stenopetala. So the oleifera is the Asian type, and the Stenopetala is East Africa, mainly found in the southern part of Ethiopia, northern part of Kenya, and eastern part of Somalia. So, and according to our results, especially the amino acid content, composition of the leaf of the Stenopetala is really, appreciable. It's even some of them are comparable to those found in South Africa. So what I'm saying, the research what we did is for poultry nutrition, not for human. But this will be also applied to, because in Eastern Africa, people are also using the leaves as spinach or whatever, as a source of meat. So in the future, I hope this type of leaves could be included, because here we are talking about African indigenous leaf or African indigenous vegetable. So that could be, I think, where we can create a link, as one of our colleagues before the coffee break mentioned, including multiple tree species in such activities. If I'm allowed, I would like to ask the second presenter about African indigenous vegetables, especially the leafy vegetables. You told us that the iron and the zinc were lost during processing, okay, and the value chain. And even the antioxidative carotenoids were also lost. But what about the loss of other nutrients? The proteins, the vitamins, okay? You really tell us about the possible loss of this very important nutrient, because if you are talking about leaf, then this leafy matter for sure they can also valuable proteins. Okay, so what about the loss of these nutrients? And using ultraviolet to treat loss of some elements, some especially mineral elements, that can work. But what about the effect on some volatile nutrients? We have also seen the other side of the coin. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We will, I think that was quite a lot, so first we will try to answer this question. If there is no immediate link to the question before, and then just before Susanne will start with her answer, just to mention in our project that there is a debate about the role of the supermarkets and what's happening there, and there is a clear tendency to the supermarket. But we should be aware, for instance, in Kenya, the share of the supermarkets is about 10% or something like that, and all what I have read also from the socioeconomics say it won't substantially, it will increase definitely, but not as much. So we have also to focus to the local markets, maybe to see if hygienic situation and other things on these local markets be improved. That would be one part of our strategy. But still, Susanne should say something about it.
Yeah, thank you very much for your comments. First of all, we did various observations looking at the open market and also the supermarket. And we found out that, for instance, in the open markets, of course, people, women mainly, are standing around the commodities. And of course, they are taking much more care about the commodities. They see when they are going to wilt, and they can observe it. And while in the supermarket, they are mainly offered in bunches, and the product care is really completely insufficient. And therefore, recommendation should be really to pack, when you offer it in the supermarket, that packaging might be one essential tool to avoid any mineral or other health-promoting components, the losses. Yeah? So that is the reason why in the supermarket you have tremendous losses, higher than in the open market. Also, of course, you might have also some contaminations. We didn't focus on that issue. Of course, it might be important, but still, that is what we observe. And coming to your last comment, why didn't we show also protein losses and etc.? Of course, we are having some shortages in time, to present all of our results, and that was mainly where we focused on when we talk about hidden hunger, these kind of mineral elements, or also health-promoting properties. So we picked up the key information to provide the audience of course. And considering your suggestion of moringa, I'm coming from the Department of Urban Ecophysiology, and we are working very strongly on moringa and also on the nutritional components of moringa, and so maybe in the break we have some discussion about that. So from my side, maybe Elisha would like to comment here.
Thank you very much. I think you've really raised very important questions and very important comments. And I just want to address the issue of UVC that you talked about. And the UVC that you applied, first of all, is the lower dosage, not the higher dosage that you saw. It means that it will not have impact on the volatility of the compound. And the UVC, just to break it down, is almost just like where we are like this, then you switch on the light. So it really does not have much impact of the, maybe affecting the volatility of the compound. Yeah, so I think that's the issue.
Okay, first we have now a question here and then two other questions, but first I would like to.
My name is Aka Giessen from the University of Nigeria. I'm doing my PhD in the University of Nairobi. So is a comment and also kind of question of just to raise an issue. Now, depending on how you sample, because I know that some market women, they have so much market or demand that their supply come on daily basis. So that could contribute to some of your findings, depending on how you sample. Finding that the components in the vegetables from the markets were high. Because supermarkets, although they still keep it in a modified environment of 7 degrees and all that, which should actually make it to have higher components. But I observe that sometimes, because the open market, larger percentage of the people, like he said, only 10% of sales to consumers is contributed from the supermarket. So you see that because larger percentage of people go to the open market to buy because it is cheaper there. Then when the supermarkets get their supply, within maybe 1, 2 days, 3 days, they got their supply, it's still fresh. There may not be much difference. But by 1 week, because sometimes you go to buy some of the vegetables, they're already yellowy. Maybe it has stayed 1 week, 2 weeks, and not much people, it's more of people with money that comes to buy it. So I think that is the major issue with supermarkets. But as he pointed out, their supply may be more reliable because if supermarkets are monitored in terms of product traceability, you see that they get from a certain supplier and the kind of incidence of toxicants like heavy metals, like people just grow vegetables anywhere. But if they are monitored like those big supermarkets, it is easier for them to get their supply from a reliable source. So that's what I think. Then the other thing is, some of these technologies, the problem, like we talked of the bag, the Ziploc bag and the other one, the problem sometimes is the cost of ants. Because people buy from the local market because it's cheap. If somebody buys 10 shillings kales, you see that you can serve at least one person. But if you go to the supermarket, you can buy it twice that amount. And not everybody, people are just trying to curtail their expenses, given the economic situation. So you see that the issue, as I'm raising it, is when some of these technologies that through science were able to proffer the solution, it now raises the cost again. Now putting off people from even consuming as much. And when the market women start using this Ziploc bag, how do they now preserve it? Because there is no refrigeration facility in the market. Where would they put it? Because if you just zip it like that and keep it under the sun and all, I think it will even spoil faster. That is the way I see it. Then another thing I want to say is the fermentation issue, because I'm working on pudi from a legume that I want to use fermentation to improve on the traditional method making it just toasted, the whole seed is just toasted without fortification or any other treatment, and milled into flour, and now used for baby pudding. So I wanted to use fermentation. I'm also still, when the presentation was going on, I was also looking at, even before now, I was looking at some of these traditional foods that when we improve on it, because food security has components of, not just availability of sufficiency, but that is culturally acceptable. You don't really modify taste in a way that the people that you're trying to improve the product for don't like the taste and some other things that make it traditional. So I keep wondering, I know that improving the it with fermentation it may not really change the taste, but I look at, we want to get a product that, people people can buy and travel with and all that. And now canning comes into the issue. Because most traditional food are prepared in such a way that you just eat it, that's the highest you want it, and eat it the next day. Now when this technology of canning comes in, like I know that in my department in Osaka, somebody was trying to use fermentation and canning to produce pudding from Bambara Nut. Now the way you can it, the cost is raised. So you see that the majority of, so sometimes it's a problem that goes on in my mind, improving, and sometimes when you want to can it, you modify the environment, so that, that's just an issue I wanted to raise too.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for your comment. Before I give the word to the others, I would just to mention this is one challenge, for instance, of a project like we are doing, that there is no solution or one solution which fits all. So you have to be very careful, and at the end we are coming not to the conclusions one way, it's a solution for everything. So for instance, if you're going to the supermarket, it has some advantages, but we have also we have also the smallholder farmers in mind when we are looking to it. And for instance, there were some experience with the farmers working with the supermarkets that there is no contract really existing in a way. In some cases we have the situation that farmers are just paid for the vegetables which are just sold in the supermarket, and they were not very much sure about what is the effect on it. Just to make it a little bit short, in addition to it, we are trying to have a type of value chain project which is especially looking to the governance structures, to the rules in the system, and are looking to this aspect if the supply of those products is really contributing to farmers' income, because this would be very much necessary. This is the one thing. The other thing I just said about that we don't promote the one way or the other way. We just say we have to have in mind that, for instance, open market are in the moment the main place where people are buying their product, and there we could think about how to improve this system in case of organic standards or something like that. So also with the last topic, it's not the solution if we are talking for preservation, but maybe it's one solution, and we have seen that in different regions of Kenya, people are handling this quite different. Even the culture in the different regions is quite different, and you have to be aware of it. But I would just like to give the word to one of
just
you.
one. I don't want, I would like to support that, what Professor Bokelmann said. We really don't want to provide recommendations one-sided. So only buying on the open market or only buying on the supermarket, and I don't want to put some negative impacts on the supermarkets, but to be aware of some problems which may arise, and then to recommend how could we solve that problem. For instance, packaging might be an issue in supermarkets, or offering processed commodities in the supermarket. They're just options which you have to supply these African leafy vegetables, and not either or, but have a broad range of different possibilities of fermenting and cooked already and preserved African leafy vegetables.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Could we are not running out of time. We still have some. I have two from here and here. First from you.
Again, it brings me back to the question of, linking with the key players on the ground. Like in Kenya, we have got cooperatives like the milk, we have got tea growers and all these other people who somebody has provided a central place where people can bring things and hold it in a way and provide transportation or make arrangements for them to be transported in a way. So we still have to find a way, a middle point between the retailers and the food industry and how we can assist the farmers to uptake. I mean, this, I agree with that completely. The technology, they can't uptake it. Yeah, we are working with the farmers now. They can't do everything. They cannot do math. They cannot do any of those because of their limited income, capacity, and everything else. So we still must link with other key players if we want to have the farmers helped in any way. So are we doing that?
Okay. That is one topic also, just very much in short to mention it. As I said, we have one project focusing on the value chain and the governance issue in the value chain. What we have identified is, especially the thing you said, we need to look also for the intermediate institution which would be necessary. The one could be cooperatives, but it could be other service providers which could help to overcome some of these limitations, and it's an institutional matter we have to look for. We are aware about this problem. We don't have any immediate solution, but still this is a topic which is of utmost importance. Yeah. Thank you. Then we have this, Elisha would say something.
Okay, just add some information concerning the topic. It's true that technology always comes with costs. But really, we are not just looking at the aspects of cost, but also you are looking at the issues. Remember, we are talking about how much money the farmer is losing if he's not using the appropriate technology. So, as much as we are looking at the money that is involved in terms of the technology coming in, we can compare with the money that has been lost when the technology is not there. Then really see if we bring in this technology, then how much can be saved. Then another aspect, the issue of the ziploc bags, the packaging that I'm talking about, this is something that is already being practiced by farmers. It's really affordable. Farmers are using it because around 250 pieces of these ziploc bags can cost around maybe say 500. And if you break it down, it's very much affordable to farmers. So when it is true that when you are looking at the technology, you also have to see the sustainability, the affordability issue. But I think this can also should not deter us also from looking at the advanced technologies which can really be helpful to the farmers. Like for example, the UVC that I'm talking about, this is an emerging technology. But if you bring in some of the insights on how it can help preserve or improve this, the nutritional components. Maybe the government or any other stakeholder can see now how we can be able to maybe support in terms of the experts.
Okay. First, comment.
Actually, it's a very quick question. Just after listening to all the presentations, one aspect that was perhaps not mentioned at all is the transfer of generational knowledge from one generation to the other. Because a lot of the way the habits that we have, how we consume food, has to do with this transfer of knowledge from one generation to the next. And for instance, when we talk about nutrition or nutritional safety, I think it's one of the issues that is very important to take into consideration. Does your research, the research that you conduct, address this at all? And if not, do you think it's something that should be incorporated as well, also to discuss at the policy level?
Yeah, just very much in short, Elisha mentioned this aspect that, for instance, these indigenous vegetables are vegetables where the older generation use it very much, the younger generation not so much. It's just an indicator for what you have said, but it's something more, the knowledge behind it's a topic. So we have, for instance, also it's taking place in a gender project which we didn't present here in a way, but they are thinking about also the knowledge of nutritional issues in those systems in a way, and trying to find out how it's possible to bring it. And we have also one project which is looking more to the transfer. one of the things is what all the things you have mentioned here are a hint to this direction that we need some type of coherence in the strategy to do it. This was the starting point. I said at the beginning we always look just to the production side. Now we see it has very much to do with knowledge and also the knowledge about consumption and those things. And in between we have a lot of stages. Post-harvest we have seen 50%. It's a very important topic. And everyone has some solution for it, but we need to think in the direction of coherence in order to promote these things. That was one of the things. Okay, there was one. I don't know if someone else would say something about the cultural issue.
Maybe I'd like to add one point. In nutrition education, we more and more go away from a perspective where one person knows what to do and tells the others what to do. And the more recently developed approach and more appropriate approach is the so-called TRIPS approach, the approach of trials of improved practices. That means first to communicate with your target population about their experiences and their perspectives and their knowledge, to learn from them, and then to develop with them together strategies to overcome problems and challenges they face in food production, food processing, food post-harvest losses, and all these other issues. And then to develop messages together with them. That also takes up the comment on the indigenous knowledge we had in the first session this morning. I think it's really important to learn that we have more to listen and not only to perceive ourselves as the ones to tell others what to do. Because the solutions are, as Professor Bokelmann also said, the solutions are often local and regional. There's no global message to be spread like a religion to other people, but it's really solutions which need to be developed out of the local situation and considering the local resources. And then the indigenous vegetables and underutilized vegetables come in by itself. In our project with nutrition education, we always included the grandmothers into this approach in order to capture this intergenerational knowledge.
Thank you very much. There was...
regarding the packaging material, in Kenya now, plastic is, flat plastic bags are banned. So are these exempted for agriculture? Agriculture is classified as an industry and then it gets exemption.
I think that's a very important question. It's true that the packaging of the plastic bags has been banned in Kenya, but they are not really that strict at the moment because right now, the solutions in terms of the fresh vegetables, it's really, really hard to find the appropriate packaging material. So for fresh vegetables, they're still allowing format. They're still using these kinds of packaging material. But it is true then we really have to think on how slowly we need to bring in the issue of the biodegradable packaging bags as opposed to.
So if you promote biodegradable, it will also create a new value chain for agricultural cellulose. It goes into this packaging material.
Yeah.
But last year we started with the biodegradable packaging material and tried to figure out how does it impact these components. We started last year with that as well.
Bess has some additional comment to it.
Yeah, I was just going to add that in Rwanda, where plastic packaging is also banned, that you can apply for an exemption for particular uses. So that would be a possibility. Yeah, I think that issue is a big one, I think, because there really is no simpler way to reduce water loss, shriveling, and wilting than with plastic bags. So how, and unfortunately, we haven't yet developed a biodegradable plastic bag that isn't at least 3 times or more expensive. So it's a big research challenge for the community to come up with a cheap way to do that.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe I missed some comments, questions. Still here? I don't know. So, if there are no questions, we are not obliged to end exactly at 1:45, but we would take this opportunity just to try to summarize a little bit, Sultan, who has done the most preparational work of this session here, I have to say, he tried to document a little bit the discussion and preparing 2 slides in order to capture a little bit the comments we got from you, which are very valuable in a way, and we would just like to present it. If someone of you would have a type of summary of this session in a way, we pass around the list with email addresses. We also would be willing to send you a type of summary of this session later on.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Thanks to all of you for the interesting presentations and also for the audience for the contributions. As Professor Bokelmann mentioned, my colleague Caroline and myself were trying to document all this session. We tried to record video, audio, and my colleague diligently took notes. So these will be available to you. Please come check out our website, horticultural.org. We try to make all presentations and all the comments available. And in case you want to get in touch with us, write to info@horticultural.org. Please note that it will take some time for us to process all this. So please look mid or end December. It should be done by then. So what I'm going to do now is give you a short overview of what we were talking about the past 3 minutes, and do that in 5 minutes. I will not succeed, but I will try to take a few examples of the arguments and the comments that we had during the last session. As you can remember, there were 2 objectives during this session, and according to this, there were 2 parts of the symposium. The first part concentrated on whether or not we're doing the right things, actually. We have the problem of malnutrition, hidden hunger, and food security. Whether this approach that we selected, focusing on under-utilized crops and improving them through value chain development, is the right approach for the future. So this is kind of like what are the pro-arguments and what are the counter-arguments of focusing on these crops as opposed to, for example, exotic vegetables, or even not vegetables but crops, cereals, for example. As you know, there are other alternative approaches, for example, to biofortified rice, which is something that could lead to the same end. And the question is, which one is better, or what are the comparative advantages of this approach? So I just picked 3 of the arguments that were frequently mentioned. And of course, if we talk about vegetables and even fruits, there are effective ways to generate nutrition security through the strong dietary diversity link that was also emphasized by Dr. Mitcham. And it can also serve as a livelihood and income generation for smallholder farmers, because it's an extremely laborious work as opposed to other types of agriculture. So smallholder farmers could actually use that labor power to generate income for themselves. Of course, if all the other problems upstream in the value chain are tackled, which I'm coming to. And of course, in addition to the nutritional benefits, there's also medicinal use. Many smallholder farmers actually believe, and there is empirical evidence of medicinal use of AIVs also. And biodiversity conservation in itself is an important goal if you consider the SDGs that was mentioned by Professor Krawinkel. Conserving biodiversity is one of the highest priority goals of the current international development agenda, and it's just one step to conclude that trying to come up with a more diverse agricultural portfolio is probably a better way than trying to enhance the crops that we keep eating with micronutrients. Of course, there are also counter-arguments, because if there were no counter-arguments, everybody would focus on under-utilized crops, but that's not the case. So there must be something that we have to actually identify and tackle. There was one comment by somebody from the audience at the back that we should have a more broader focus and also integrate other horticulture, like fruits, for example, and trees. And that's true. It's the question of how specific our approach is as opposed to how broad. There have been mentions of low shelf life, of course, as being a bottleneck in many different stages of the value chain. Of course, that constrains smallholders' marketing opportunities, because by the time they get their products to the supermarket, or even in some cases to open air markets, some of the nutrients are already lost, and even visual appearance is suboptimal. And we've seen from the presentation of Dr. Stöber that horticultural production, as opposed to other agricultural production, may be more sensitive to changes of the climate, which we must expect that it would be coming in the next few years. So that could be also a counter-argument of focusing more on underutilized crops. Now, I'm sorry if you cannot see this, but the point is not to be able to read everything, it's just to pick out a few examples. I was trying to collect all the contents from the presentations and your comments and put it in a value chain perspective. On the top you see more like the production-related problems and their respective solutions, whereas to the end, more the consumption and utilization aspects. Just to emphasize a few of them, so as not to run out of time, there are suboptimal agronomic practices, of course, resulting in low yields, high losses due to pests, due to other issues. And there have been a few solutions to that. Farmers groups for knowledge sharing could be a great way to go. We need to improve the knowledge system. There have been many mentions of the dwindling culture and indigenous knowledge that is related to underutilized crops. And this knowledge is mostly possessed by the elderly. And of course, we need to find a way to pass on this knowledge to the younger generations if we want to promote AIVs. Also, the high perishability. We have seen many tangible results that could help alleviate these problems. For example, sun drying, solar drying, blanching before drying, fermentation. We see that storage conditions matter a lot, obviously. We've seen a few solutions like bag packaging. There are also zero energy coolers and many innovations that are developed in our and in many other projects, actually. We've seen the UVC treatment, which is not particularly for smallholder farmers, but we also need to find ways to have retail actors equipment in place to preserve the nutrient content. And we've seen that how AIVs are cooked and prepared matter greatly. If they're fried, obviously much of the nutrients gets lost. So in order not to take too much time, I would perhaps just mention another issue highlighted red, the time required to prepare AIVs. This is essentially one of a great bottleneck to consuming AIVs. Some AIVs actually need 2 or 3 hours to prepare, and obviously this is a big problem. So new innovative recipes or cooking workshops and even ready-to-cook AIVs could help. I mean, in Kenyan supermarkets, actually, you can already buy prepared AIVs for takeaway because there is demand, obviously. There were a few other problems, but we will try to put all this onto a 2-page summary. And in case you've signed this paper, hopefully going around, we will be able to send it to you. Otherwise, just come on our website, horticultural.org, and you'll find the video and notes there. Thanks very much for coming. And